My son-in-law made my daughter fight with me for 8 years. They kept me away from my grandchildren. When I sold my company for $80 million, they suddenly showed up. We need to move in. The twins will love this place. I looked him in the eyes and I said 3 words that made him faint. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is George, and at 63, I thought I had seen every kind of betrayal life could throw at me. I was wrong. The worst betrayal came from within my own family, orchestrated by a man I had welcomed into our lives with open arms. It started so gradually that I didn't even notice it happening. Marcus had been dating my daughter Sarah for about 6 months when the first seed was planted. We were having Sunday dinner at my house, as we did every week, and my twin grandsons Jake and Tommy were running around the living room after dessert. They were only 4 then, full of energy and laughter that filled every corner of my home. "Dad, maybe you could tone it down a bit with the boys," Sarah said quietly as I was teaching them to play chess. I looked up, confused. Marcus sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, nodding seriously. "What do you mean?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "Well," Marcus interrupted, his voice concerned but measured. "They're getting pretty wound up. Kids need structure, you know, boundaries." I felt my chest tighten, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was being too indulgent as a grandfather. So I pulled back, just a little. The comments became more frequent over the following months. If I bought the boys ice cream, Marcus would mention their sugar intake. If I let them stay up past their bedtime when they visited, he'd express concern about their sleep schedule. Each criticism was delivered with this caring tone, as if he was just looking out for everyone's best interests. "George means well," he'd say to Sarah when he thought I couldn't hear, "but he doesn't understand modern parenting approaches." Sarah began to change. She started questioning things she'd never questioned before. When I offered to take the boys to the park, she'd hesitate. When I suggested family outings, she'd find excuses. The woman who used to call me 3 times a week started calling once, then every other week. The real poison started when the boys turned 5. Marcus began suggesting that my old-fashioned discipline methods might be harmful. He'd bring up articles about child psychology, always with this earnest expression, always positioning himself as the protective father figure. "I caught your dad yelling at Jake yesterday," he told Sarah one evening. "I hadn't yelled. I'd simply raised my voice slightly when Jake was about to touch a hot stove." But Marcus had a way of twisting every interaction, every moment, until it sounded sinister. "Are you sure, Marcus?" Sarah asked, but I could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. "I know it's hard to accept," he said, his voice full of false sympathy. "But sometimes people change as they get older. Maybe your dad is under more stress than we realize." The breaking point came during Jake and Tommy's 6th birthday party. I had planned the whole thing, rented a bounce house, ordered their favorite cake, invited all their little friends. Sarah seemed tense all day, but I assumed it was just party stress. After the last guest left and we were cleaning up, Marcus pulled Sarah aside. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I heard their hushed conversation in the living room. "Did you see how aggressive he got with Tommy about the cake?" Marcus whispered. I froze. Tommy had wanted a second piece of cake, and I'd simply said, "Let's save some for later, buddy." That was it, nothing more. "I didn't think it was that bad," Sarah replied, but her voice sounded uncertain. "Sarah, I'm worried about the boys. I've been noticing patterns. The way he loses his temper, the way he tries to undermine our authority. I think we need to be more careful about unsupervised visits." My hands stopped moving in the soapy water. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "You really think so?" Sarah asked. "I love your father," Marcus said, and I could practically hear the fake sincerity dripping from his words. "But I love our sons more. We have to protect them." That night Sarah called me. Her voice was strained, formal in a way it had never been before. "Dad, Marcus and I have been talking. We think it might be better if your visits with the boys were supervised for a while." "Supervised?" The word felt foreign in my mouth. "Sarah, what are you talking about?" "It's just temporary," she said quickly, "until things settle down." "What things? What exactly am I supposed to have done?" There was a long silence. Then Sarah said the words that shattered my world. "Dad, you've been different lately. More irritable, more controlling. The boys have mentioned feeling scared sometimes." "Scared? Of me?" I could barely breathe. "Sarah, you know that's not true. You know I would never hurt those boys." "I want to believe that," she said. and I could hear tears in her voice. But I have to think about what's best for Jake and Tommy. The phone calls became less frequent. The visits stopped altogether. Marcus had successfully painted me as an unstable old man who posed a threat to his own grandsons. And Sarah, my sweet Sarah, who I had raised alone after her mother died, believed him. The last time I saw my grandsons as children was at a grocery store about 6 months later. They were with Sarah, and when Jake spotted me and started to wave, Sarah quickly steered them toward another aisle. But not before I saw the confusion in Jake's eyes, the way Tommy looked around as if he was searching for something he'd lost. I stood there in that grocery store, watching my family disappear around the corner, and I realized that Marcus hadn't just manipulated Sarah, he had stolen my grandsons, and somehow I had become the villain in my own family's story. The silence in my house became deafening. Every corner that once echoed with the laughter of Jake and Tommy now felt like a tomb. Their drawings were still on my refrigerator, slowly fading under the fluorescent light. Their toys remained in the spare bedroom I had converted into a playroom, gathering dust like abandoned dreams. The first year was the hardest. I kept expecting Sarah to call, to realize what Marcus was doing to our family. I imagined her showing up at my door with the boys, apologizing for the misunderstanding. I practiced what I would say, how graciously I would forgive her, how we would rebuild what had been torn apart, but the call never came. I tried reaching out, of course. I sent birthday cards that were returned unopened. I left voicemails that went unreturned. I even drove to their house once. But Marcus answered the door with this patronizing smile and told me that Sarah wasn't ready to see me yet, that I needed to respect the healing process. "George," he said, blocking the doorway with his body, "I understand this is difficult for you, but pushing isn't going to help anyone. Maybe you should consider talking to someone about these feelings of anger." The way he said it, so calm and reasonable, made my blood boil. But I could see the neighbors watching from their windows, and I knew that any reaction from me would just prove his point. So I turned and walked away, feeling smaller with each step. The holidays were brutal. Christmas morning without the sound of children tearing through wrapping paper felt like a punishment. I started volunteering at the local shelter just to have somewhere to go, something to do with my hands that didn't involve staring at empty rooms. But in my darkest moments, I made a decision that would change everything. If I couldn't be a grandfather, if I couldn't pour my love and energy into family, then I would pour it into work. I had a small consulting business that I'd been running part-time since retirement. I threw myself into it with an intensity that surprised even me. At first, it was just busy work, a way to fill the endless hours. But gradually, I realized I was good at this. Really good. The business grew from a one-man operation in my home office to a small firm downtown. Within 2 years, I had 5 employees. Within 4, I had 20. I worked 16-hour days because going home to the empty house was unbearable. I took on projects across the country because traveling meant I didn't have to see other grandfathers pushing strollers in the park or teaching their grandkids to ride bikes. Every time I saw a man my age with children, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. The irony wasn't lost on me. As my business thrived, as my bank account grew, as industry magazines wrote articles about my success, my family remained frozen in time. Jake and Tommy were growing up without me. They were learning to ride bikes, losing teeth, starting school, and I wasn't there for any of it. Sometimes I would drive by their elementary school, hoping to catch a glimpse of them at recess. I felt pathetic doing it, like some kind of stalker, but I couldn't help myself. I needed to know they were okay, that they were growing up healthy and happy, even if I couldn't be part of it. I saw them once, during a school field day. They were taller. Their faces had lost that baby roundness I remembered. Jake had lost his front teeth, and Tommy had gotten glasses. They looked like strangers. These boys I had once known better than anyone in the world. The worst part was the way they seemed perfectly fine without me. They were laughing with their classmates, running around with endless energy. They weren't scanning the crowd looking for their grandfather. They had moved on, just like Sarah had taught them to do. On their 8th birthday, I broke down and tried calling Sarah one more time. The phone rang and rang before going to voicemail. Her voice sounded older, more distant than I remembered. "Sarah, it's Dad," I said to the machine, my voice cracking despite my efforts to stay strong. "I know you don't want to hear from me, but it's the boys' birthday. I just wanted you to know that I'm thinking about them. I hope they're happy. I hope they know that their grandfather loves them, even if..." I couldn't finish the sentence. Even if what? Even if I was apparently such a terrible person that my own daughter couldn't let me see my grandsons? Even if 8 years had passed and I still didn't understand what I had done wrong? I hung up the phone and sat in my office, surrounded by awards and newspaper clippings and evidence of my professional success, feeling like the loneliest man in the world. My business partner Janet found me there an hour later, staring out the window at nothing. "George," she said gently, "you can't keep doing this to yourself." "I built this whole company," I said without looking at her. "But I can't even see my own grandsons. What's the point of any of it?" She didn't have an answer, because there wasn't one. Success meant nothing when you had no one to share it with. Money couldn't buy back lost time or heal relationships that had been poisoned beyond repair. But the business kept growing, and I kept working, because it was the only thing that made sense anymore. It was the only thing I had left that Marcus couldn't take away from me. At least, that's what I thought at the time. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was in my corner office reviewing quarterly reports when Janet knocked and entered with an expression I'd never seen before. Excitement mixed with disbelief. "George, you need to sit down," she said, closing the door behind her. "I am sitting down," I replied, not looking up from the spreadsheet on my screen. "Global Tech wants to buy us out." "The whole company. They're offering $80 million. My fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. Slowly, I turned to face her. $80 million? She nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she held the official offer letter. "They want our client list, our methodology, our entire operation. They're calling us the gold standard in strategic consulting for mid-size enterprises." I stared at the number on the paper. $80 million. More money than I had ever imagined having. More money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. And all I could think about was Jake and Tommy, now 14 years old, who wouldn't even recognize me if they passed me on the street. The negotiations took 3 months. Lawyers, accountants, executives in expensive suits. They all treated me like I was some kind of genius, a visionary who had built something extraordinary. They wanted to keep me on as a consultant for the transition. They wanted to write case studies about my business model. They wanted to feature me in Forbes magazine. What they didn't understand was that I had built this empire not out of ambition or vision, but out of grief. Every client I'd landed, every deal I'd closed, every innovation I'd developed had been fueled by the hole in my chest where my family used to be. I wasn't a success story. I was a cautionary tale. The morning I signed the final papers, I sat alone in the conference room after everyone had left. The check, a piece of paper that represented 8 years of 16-hour days, countless missed meals, and more loneliness than any man should endure, lay on the polished mahogany table in front of me. My phone buzzed with congratulatory texts. Business associates, former employees, industry contacts, everyone wanted to celebrate with me. They suggested dinner at the most expensive restaurant in town, a party at the country club, a vacation to somewhere exotic and expensive. But who was I supposed to celebrate with? Who was I supposed to share this moment with? The 2 people who should have been proudest of me, my daughter and my grandsons, didn't even know it had happened. For all I knew, they still thought of me as that angry old man who had somehow scared his own grandsons. I drove home to my empty house and sat in the kitchen where I had once served birthday cake to 2 giggling 6-year-olds. The silence was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming, the clock ticking on the wall, my own breathing echoing in the emptiness. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went up to the playroom I had created for Jake and Tommy. I flipped on the light and looked around at the toys that had been waiting patiently for their return, the wooden train set, the building blocks, the basket of stuffed animals. Everything was exactly as they had left it 8 years ago, preserved like a shrine to a relationship that had been murdered by manipulation and lies. I picked up a small action figure that Tommy had been playing with during his last visit. Superman, with one arm slightly bent from being carried everywhere a 5-year-old went. I remembered how he used to make flying sounds as he moved the figure through the air, how his whole face would light up when he played out elaborate rescue scenarios. Now Tommy was 14. He probably didn't play with action figures anymore. He had probably forgotten all about the grandfather who used to get down on the floor and play superheroes with him, who used to read him bedtime stories and make funny voices for all the characters. The money felt like blood money. I had gained a fortune and lost everything that mattered. I was financially successful and emotionally bankrupt. I could buy anything I wanted, and there was nothing I wanted that could be bought. Over the following weeks, real estate agents called constantly. They wanted to show me mansions with guest wings and swimming pools and wine cellars. They described properties with enough bedrooms for a dozen grandchildren, enough space for family gatherings that would never happen. I ended up buying a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood, not because I needed 3 bedrooms, but because 1 bedroom felt too much like giving up completely. The extra rooms sat empty, but somehow they felt less empty than the playroom in my old house had felt. The local newspaper ran a story about the sale of my company. "Local entrepreneur strikes it rich," the headline read. They interviewed me for 20 minutes, asking about my business philosophy, my plans for retirement, my advice for other aspiring entrepreneurs. They never asked about family. They never asked if success felt different when you had no one to share it with. Friends and acquaintances treated me differently after the story ran. Suddenly, everyone wanted to have lunch, to catch up, to ask for investment advice. People who had barely acknowledged me before now smiled widely when they saw me at the grocery store. But none of them knew that I would have traded every dollar of that $80 million to have Jake and Tommy run up to me and hug my legs the way they used to. None of them understood that success without love is just elaborate loneliness dressed up in expensive clothes. I started carrying the newspaper clipping in my wallet, not out of pride, but as a reminder of what I had accomplished and how hollow it felt. Sometimes I would take it out and stare at the photo of me in my office, surrounded by awards and certificates, smiling for the camera like a man who had everything he wanted. The man in that photograph looked successful. He looked confident and accomplished and satisfied with his life. But I knew the truth that the camera couldn't capture. That man was dying inside, one empty day at a time. And somewhere across town, my grandsons were growing up, becoming teenagers, forming opinions about the world and their place in it. They were probably driving now, dating, thinking about college. And they were doing all of it without the grandfather who loved them more than life itself, who would have given every penny of his fortune just to know they were okay. The worst part was knowing that Marcus had won. He had successfully erased me from their lives so completely that my absence had become normal. They probably didn't even think about me anymore. I had become just a vague memory from their early childhood, like the imaginary friend they had outgrown. The doorbell rang on a Saturday afternoon in late September. I was in my study going through investment portfolios, trying to figure out what to do with money I had never expected to have. The sound startled me. I rarely had visitors anymore, and certainly not unannounced ones. When I opened the door, my heart stopped. There stood Sarah, looking older, but still recognizably my daughter. Beside her was Marcus, that same calculated smile I remembered from 8 years ago. And behind them, towering over their parents, were Jake and Tommy, my grandsons. They were 15 now, tall and lean with voices that had changed. Jake had his mother's dark hair but wore it longer, and Tommy still had those same intelligent eyes behind glasses that were now stylish frames instead of the thick children's glasses I remembered. For a moment, none of us spoke. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself, feeling like I might collapse from the shock of seeing them after so many years. "Dad," Sarah said, her voice careful and rehearsed. "We were hoping we could talk to you." I looked at Marcus, who was nodding encouragingly at Sarah like a director coaching an actor. The boys stood awkwardly behind them, clearly uncomfortable, looking everywhere except at me. "Of course," I managed to say, stepping aside to let them in. "Please, come in." As they walked into my living room, I watched Jake and Tommy looking around with curiosity. This wasn't the house they remembered. I had sold the family home with all its memories after buying this smaller place. Everything was different, unfamiliar. I was essentially a stranger to them now, and my home was just another strange place they had never been. "This is nice, Dad," Sarah said, sitting on the edge of the couch like she was ready to leave at any moment. "Very peaceful." Marcus settled beside her with the confidence of a man who belonged everywhere he went. "George, you look well. Really well. Retirement seems to be treating you kindly." I almost laughed at that. If he only knew how I spent my days, rattling around this quiet house, having one-sided conversations with myself, eating dinner alone while watching the news. But I just nodded and sat across from them. Jake and Tommy remained standing, hands in their pockets, looking supremely uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Boys," Marcus said, his tone carrying that subtle authority I remembered, "don't you want to say hello to your grandfather?" "Hey," Jake mumbled. not quite meeting my eyes. Tommy gave a small wave. Hi. My throat tightened. These were the children who used to launch themselves into my arms, who used to beg me to read them one more story, who used to call me Grandpa George in voices full of love and trust. Now they were polite strangers, clearly present only because they had been told to be. "It's so good to see you both," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've grown so much. You're both taller than your mother now." They smiled politely but didn't respond. Sarah filled the awkward silence. "We heard about your business," she said. "Congratulations. That must have been exciting." "It was. Unexpected," I replied, watching Marcus carefully. His eyes had sharpened with interest at the mention of my financial windfall, and I could practically see the calculations happening behind his smile. $80 million, Marcus said, shaking his head in admiration. "That's incredible, George. You must be proud of what you built." There was something in his tone that set off alarm bells in my head. This wasn't casual conversation. This was reconnaissance. "Dad," Sarah said, glancing at Marcus before continuing, "we've been doing a lot of thinking lately, about family, about how important it is to stay connected." I felt a bitter laugh building in my chest, but swallowed it down. "Have you?" "The boys have been asking about you," she continued, which was clearly a lie based on how uncomfortable Jake and Tommy looked. "They want to get to know their grandfather better." Marcus leaned forward, his voice warm and sincere in that practiced way of his. "We realize we may have been overprotective before. The boys were so young and we were just trying to do what we thought was best. But they're teenagers now. They can make their own decisions about relationships. The audacity of it took my breath away." This man had spent years systematically destroying my relationship with my grandsons, had turned my own daughter against me, had stolen 8 years of their childhood from me. And now he was sitting in my living room, spinning it like it had all been a reasonable parenting choice. "I see," I said, my voice carefully neutral. Sarah seemed to sense my skepticism because she tried a different approach. "Dad, I know things have been difficult between us. I know you're probably angry about how we handled everything, but can't we put the past behind us? Can't we be a family again?" Marcus nodded earnestly. "Family is everything, George. At the end of the day, that's all that really matters. Not business success, not money, just family." The word money hung in the air like smoke. I looked at my grandsons, who were studying the carpet like it held the secrets of the universe. They didn't want to be here. They had been dragged here for reasons they probably didn't fully understand. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. Marcus and Sarah exchanged a look, the kind of look that passes between conspirators who have rehearsed this conversation. "Well," Marcus said, spreading his hands like he was presenting a gift, "we were thinking it might be nice if we could spend more time together as a family. The boys are at such an important age, and they could really benefit from having their grandfather in their lives." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "And honestly, Dad, we've been looking at houses in this area. The boys' school district isn't great, and we thought it might be time for a change. This neighborhood has excellent schools." There it was, the real reason for this visit, not reconciliation, not family healing, not guilt over keeping me away from my grandsons for 8 years. Money. They had heard about my windfall and decided it was time to cash in. Marcus continued, his voice growing more animated. "Actually, we drove by that beautiful house on Maple Street. You know, the one with the big backyard and the swimming pool? It would be perfect for the boys. Room to spread out, space for everyone to visit." He paused meaningfully, and I realized where this was going. "The thing is," Sarah said, looking almost embarrassed, "our credit isn't great right now. Marcus's business has had some setbacks, and with the boys getting ready for college, we were hoping," Marcus said, his voice carefully casual, "that maybe you might consider helping us out. Not a loan. We wouldn't ask you to risk your money like that. More like a family investment. You could buy the house and we could all share it. The boys would have their space, you'd have your space, and we could finally be the family we should have been all along." I sat there in stunned silence, looking at these people who had cut me out of their lives so completely that I had become a stranger to my own grandsons. Now they wanted me to buy them a house. They wanted to use my money, earned through 8 years of grief and loneliness, to fund their comfortable suburban lifestyle. Jake shifted uncomfortably and spoke for the first time since his mumbled greeting. "Can we wait in the car?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "We're having a family discussion. This concerns you too." I watched my grandson's face tighten with embarrassment and realized that he knew exactly what this was about. These boys weren't stupid. They understood they were being used as props in their stepfather's financial scheme. "It sounds like you've given this a lot of thought," I said finally. Marcus smiled broadly. "We have. We really think this could be a fresh start for all of us. The boys would love having their grandfather so close, won't you boys?" Jake and Tommy nodded dutifully, but their discomfort was palpable. They were being coached to perform affection they didn't feel for a grandfather they barely remembered. And in that moment, looking at my grandsons' faces, I realized that Marcus had made a crucial miscalculation. He thought I was a lonely old man who would pay any price for a relationship with my family. He thought my love for these boys made me weak, made me desperate enough to be manipulated. He was right about my love for Jake and Tommy, but he was wrong about everything else. "Well," I said, standing up slowly, "this is certainly unexpected. I'll need some time to think about it." Marcus's smile faltered slightly. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But George, opportunities like this don't come along every day. That house on Maple Street won't stay on the market forever." As they prepared to leave, Sarah hugged me awkwardly at the door. "I'm glad we did this, Dad. I've missed you." I wanted to believe her. Part of me, the part that remembered teaching her to ride a bike, walking her down the aisle at her first wedding, holding her when she cried, wanted to believe that somewhere under Marcus's influence, my real daughter still existed. But as I watched them walk to their car, I saw Marcus put his arm around her shoulders in that possessive way of his. Saw him whisper something in her ear that made her nod obediently. They weren't here because they missed me. They were here because they needed me. And there's a world of difference between those two things. 3 days passed before Marcus called. I had been expecting it. Men like him don't like to wait when money is on the table. His voice was friendly but carried an undertone of impatience that he was trying hard to conceal. "George, I hope you've had time to think about our conversation. Sarah and I are really excited about this opportunity to bring the family back together." "I have been thinking about it," I said, settling into my kitchen chair with my morning coffee. "In fact, I'd like to discuss it further. Could you come by this evening? Just you and me." There was a brief pause. "What about Sarah? And the boys?" "I think it's better if we talk man to man first, get the details sorted out before involving everyone else." I could hear the wheels turning in his head. He was probably wondering if this was good news or bad news, if I was making it easier for him or harder, but greed won out over caution, as it usually does. "Sure," he said. "I'll be there around 7. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to the cemetery where my wife Margaret was buried. I hadn't visited her grave since the first year after Sarah cut me off. It had been too painful, standing there alone with no grandchildren to tell her about, no family updates to share. I knelt beside her headstone and brushed away the leaves that had gathered around it. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, Maggie," I said quietly, "but I can't let him keep winning. I can't let him think he can just waltz back into my life when it's convenient for him." A cold October wind rustled through the oak trees around us. Margaret had always been better at dealing with people than I was. She would have known how to handle Marcus, how to protect our grandsons without destroying our daughter. But Margaret was gone, and I had to figure this out on my own. At exactly 7 o'clock, Marcus knocked on my door. He was dressed casually but expensively. Designer jeans, Italian leather shoes, a sweater that probably cost more than most people's rent. He looked like a man who was used to getting what he wanted. "George," he said, shaking my hand with that firm grip that was supposed to convey sincerity and strength. "Thank you for making time for this. I really think this could be the start of something beautiful for our family." I led him to the living room and offered him a drink, which he declined. He sat on the edge of the couch, leaning forward slightly like a salesman closing a deal. "So," he said, "have you given any more thought to the house situation?" I drove by the Maple Street property again today. It really is perfect. 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, that gorgeous backyard. The boys would love it. "Tell me something, Marcus," I said, settling into my chair across from him. "What changed?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" 8 years ago, you convinced my daughter that I was dangerous, that I was a threat to my own grandsons. You orchestrated my removal from their lives so completely that they barely remember me. What changed?" His smile never wavered, but something shifted behind his eyes. "George, I think you're misremembering how things happened. We never said you were dangerous. We were just concerned about some behavioral patterns we noticed. And we were young parents, maybe overly protective. Behavioral patterns, I repeated. Like what exactly? Well, he said, spreading his hands, you were going through a difficult time, adjusting to retirement, dealing with loneliness after Margaret's death. We thought it might be affecting your interactions with the boys. The casual way he invoked my wife's name made my jaw clench, but I kept my voice level. So you decided the best solution was to cut me off completely? It was meant to be temporary, he said, his tone becoming slightly defensive, just until you worked through some of those issues. But then you became so angry, so bitter about it, the calls, the unexpected visits, the way you refused to respect our boundaries. It made things complicated. I stared at him, marveling at his ability to rewrite history so completely. In his version of events, I was the problem. I was the one who had made reconciliation impossible with my unreasonable behavior. And now, I asked, now the boys are older. They can handle more complex family dynamics. And honestly, George, we think having their grandfather in their lives could be really beneficial, especially with college coming up. They could use some male guidance, some wisdom from someone who's achieved real success. There it was again, the subtle reference to my money. Everything came back to that. Marcus, I said, leaning forward, let me ask you something directly. How much do you need? His eyebrows shot up in surprise. I'm sorry. The house on Maple Street. How much does it cost? Oh, he said, his relief evident. It's listed at $1, $2 million, but I think we could get it for $1, maybe even less in this market. And what about your current financial situation? You mentioned Marcus's business had some setbacks. For the first time, his composure cracked slightly. Well, yes, there have been some challenges. The economy has been tough on everyone. But that's not really what this is about, George. This is about family. I nodded slowly. Of course, family. Tell me, Marcus, in all these years that I've been cut off from my family, did you ever once suggest to Sarah that maybe she should call me? Maybe invite me to a birthday party or a school play? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was more cautious. Like I said, things were complicated. We didn't want to rush anything. 8 years, Marcus. You didn't want to rush anything for 8 years. The silence stretched between us. I could see him recalculating, trying to figure out if I was building up to saying yes or no to his proposal. Finally, he leaned back and let out a sigh. Okay, George, you want honesty? Here's honesty. Yes, we need help. Yes, I've made some bad business decisions. And yes, when we heard about your success, we thought maybe this was an opportunity for all of us to benefit. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Go on. Look, he said, his voice becoming more animated, more confident. You're a successful businessman. You understand how these things work. This isn't charity. It's investment. You buy the house, we all live in it. The boys get to know their grandfather, everyone wins. And when the boys inherit someday, they'll inherit something substantial instead of debt. When the boys inherit, I repeated slowly. Well, yes, eventually. I mean, you're 63, George. You're not going to live forever. And what's the point of having all that money if you can't share it with the people you love? The mask was slipping now. The careful, concerned son-in-law was being replaced by something harder, more calculating. You've really thought this through, I said. I'm a planner, he said with a shrug. Always have been. That's how I knew from the beginning that cutting you off was a mistake. I just had to wait for the right time to fix it. My blood went cold. What do you mean, you knew from the beginning? Marcus paused, and I could see him realizing he had said too much. But he was in too deep to backtrack now. George, come on. You're a smart man. You had to know that Sarah didn't come up with all those concerns about your behavior on her own. She loved you. She would have let you see those boys every day if I hadn't. He stopped abruptly, but it was too late. The truth was out. If you hadn't what, Marcus? He stood up, his friendly demeanor completely gone now. Look, it doesn't matter now. What matters is moving forward. You can keep holding grudges, or you can be practical. You have money and no family. We have family and no money. It's simple mathematics. You destroyed my relationship with my grandsons on purpose, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I protected my family's future, he shot back. Sarah was weak when it came to you. She would have let you manipulate those boys, turn them against me the way you tried to turn her against me. I couldn't let that happen. The room seemed to spin around me. 8 years of grief. 8 years of thinking I had somehow failed as a grandfather. 8 years of wondering what I had done wrong. And it had all been calculated, planned, executed with cold precision by a man who saw my grandsons as assets to be controlled. You bastard, I said, Standing up slowly, Marcus smiled, but it wasn't friendly anymore. It was triumphant. Call me whatever you want, George, but I won. I got the girl, I got the kids, and now I'm going to get the money. Because you know what? You're going to pay for that house. You're going to pay for whatever else we need. Because those boys are the only family you have left, and I'm the one who controls your access to them. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You can hate me all you want, but if you don't cooperate, you'll never see Jake and Tommy again. And this time, there won't be any chance for reconciliation. They'll be adults soon, and they'll move on with their lives. And you'll die alone in this house with nothing but your money to keep you warm. The threat hung in the air between us like poison gas. Marcus was right, and we both knew it. He held all the cards. He had my grandsons, he had my daughter, and he was betting that my love for them would make me surrender everything else. But as I looked into his cold, calculating eyes, I realized something that Marcus had failed to understand about me. 8 years of grief and loneliness had indeed changed me, but not in the way he expected. It had made me stronger. I looked at Marcus standing in my living room, his face twisted with arrogance and greed, finally showing his true colors after years of careful manipulation. He thought he had me cornered. He thought my love for Jake and Tommy made me weak, made me desperate enough to surrender my dignity and my fortune just for the chance to be in their lives again. He was wrong. I walked slowly to my desk and pulled out a folder I had prepared after our last conversation. Marcus watched me with growing confidence, probably thinking I was reaching for my checkbook or legal documents to transfer the house deed. Marcus, I said, my voice calm and steady, there's something I need to tell you. I'm listening, he said, that smug smile playing around his lips. I opened the folder and pulled out a series of documents. Bank statements, legal papers, official letterheads from various charitable organizations. You know, you're right about one thing, I began. I did make $80 million from the sale of my company. And you're right that I don't have much time left to enjoy it. His smile widened. He thought I was about to capitulate. But here's what you didn't count on, I continued, holding up the papers. 3 weeks ago, right after your visit, I made some decisions about that money. Marcus's expression began to change as he focused on the documents in my hands. You see, I realized something important after seeing Jake and Tommy again. They're not the little boys I lost 8 years ago. They're strangers to me now, polite teenagers who were clearly uncomfortable being in the same room as their grandfather. And that's your doing, Marcus. You didn't just steal 8 years from me. You stole my grandsons completely. George, Marcus said, his voice losing some of its confidence. What are you getting at? I'm getting at this, I said, spreading the papers on the coffee table between us. Every single dollar of that $80 million has been donated to charity, the Children's Defense Fund, the American Association of Retired Persons, organizations that help grandparents maintain relationships with their grandchildren. The money is gone, Marcus, all of it. The color drained from his face. What are you talking about? That's impossible. You can't just give away $80 million in 3 weeks. Actually, you can. When you have good lawyers and accountants, and when you're motivated by righteous anger, it's surprisingly easy. I kept just enough to maintain a modest lifestyle for the rest of my life. The rest, every penny, went to causes that matter to me. Marcus lunged forward and grabbed the papers, his eyes scanning desperately through bank statements and donation receipts. His hands were shaking as the reality sank in. This can't be real, he whispered. You're bluffing. This is some kind of trick. Call my bank if you don't believe me, I said, pulling out my phone and placing it on the table. The number is right there on the statement. Ask them about the balance in George Hartwell's accounts. Marcus stared at the phone like it was a poisonous snake. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He could see the truth in my eyes, in my calm demeanor, in the careful documentation spread before him. You crazy old bastard, he said, his voice cracking with desperation. You gave it all away? All of it? All of it, I confirmed. The house on Maple Street, you'll have to find another way to pay for it. College tuition for the boys, that's your responsibility now. Your comfortable retirement funded by your father-in-law's guilt money, not going to happen. Marcus's face was cycling through emotions, disbelief, rage, panic. The careful composure he had maintained for 8 years was completely gone, replaced by the raw desperation of a man whose long-term plan had just exploded in his face. Sarah's going to divorce me, he said, more to himself than to me. When she finds out there's no money, when she realizes what, Marcus? That you married her for her inheritance prospects? That you spent 8 years alienating her father so you could control the eventual payout? That you used her children as pawns in your financial scheme? He looked up at me with something approaching hatred. You have no idea what you've done. I have debts, George. Serious debts. I was counting on that money. Then I guess you should have thought of that before you destroyed my relationship with my grandsons. Marcus's breathing was becoming shallow and rapid. The reality of his situation was hitting him in waves. 8 years of careful manipulation, of playing the long game, of positioning himself for this exact moment, all of it wasted. There has to be something left, he said desperately. Some account you forgot about, some investment you didn't liquidate. I shook my head. I was very thorough. But don't worry, I'm sure a resourceful man like you will figure something out. After all, you managed to convince my daughter that her loving father was a dangerous old man. Surely you can convince someone to loan you money. This is insane, he said, standing up abruptly. No one gives away $80 million out of spite. I didn't give it away out of spite, Marcus. I gave it away because I finally understood something important. You stole my grandsons from me, but you can't steal my integrity. You can't steal my values. And you can't steal my ability to ensure that my fortune goes to help other families instead of funding your parasitic lifestyle. Marcus was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. Sarah is going to find out about this. When she does, she's going to know exactly why you did it. She's going to hate you even more than she already does. Maybe, I said, but she's also going to find out the truth about you, isn't she? When the bills come due and there's no grandfather's money to bail you out, she's going to start asking questions. She's going to realize that her devoted husband married her for her potential inheritance. Marcus stopped pacing and turned to face me. For a moment I thought he might try to hit me. His fists were clenched, his face was red, and his eyes had the wild look of a cornered animal. Instead, he laughed. It was a bitter, hollow sound that had no humor in it. You think you've won something here, George? You think this makes you the hero of the story? You just guaranteed that you'll never see those boys again. Never. Sarah will make sure of it. Perhaps, I said. But I'll know that Jake and Tommy are growing up with a chance to see their stepfather for what he really is. I'll know that the money I earned through 8 years of grief and loneliness went to help other families stay together instead of funding your manipulation. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street where normal families were living normal lives. You know what the difference is between us, Marcus? You see everything as a transaction. Family, love, relationships. They're all just assets to be managed for your benefit. But some things can't be bought or sold or manipulated. Some things are worth more than money. When I turned back around, Marcus was slumped in the chair, staring at the donation papers with empty eyes. The fight had gone out of him. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire life strategy collapse in real time. How? He asked quietly. How did you know? Know what? That I was using them, that this was all about money. I sat back down and looked at this man who had caused me so much pain, who had stolen so much from me, and felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Pity. Marcus, I've been a businessman for 40 years. I know when someone is running a con. The only thing I couldn't figure out was why you waited so long to make your move. He let out a shaky breath. I was waiting for you to get older, weaker, more desperate. I thought by now you'd be so lonely, so eager for family contact, that you'd pay any price. You were almost right, I admitted. 3 weeks ago, when I first saw Jake and Tommy again, I would have paid any price. I would have bought you that house and a dozen more if it meant getting to know my grandsons again. So what changed? I picked up the Superman action figure that I still kept on the side table, the one Tommy had played with during his last visit 8 years ago. I realized that the boys you're offering me aren't my grandsons anymore. They're strangers who've been taught to see me as a stranger too. The real Jake and Tommy, the ones who used to play superheroes with me and beg for bedtime stories, you killed those boys 8 years ago, and I can't buy them back, no matter how much money I have. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked up at me with something that might have been curiosity. So what happens now? Now you go home and figure out how to explain to Sarah that the rich father-in-law you've been promising her doesn't exist anymore. You figure out how to pay your debts and fund your children's education and handle your own financial problems without using my money as a safety net. I walked to the front door and opened it. And Marcus, If you ever try to use Jake and Tommy as pawns again, if you ever try to manipulate them the way you manipulated Sarah, I'll make sure they know exactly what kind of man raised them. I may not have money anymore, but I still have the truth. Marcus stood slowly, his legs shaky like he was recovering from illness. As he walked to the door, he paused and looked back at me. Those 3 words you said, about the money being gone, that wasn't just about spite, was it? I met his eyes directly. No, Marcus, it was about justice. He nodded slowly, then walked out into the night. I watched his car disappear down the street, carrying with it 8 years of manipulation and lies and financial scheming. For the first time in nearly a decade, I felt truly free. The money was gone, but so was the weight of carrying it alone. My grandsons might still be lost to me, but at least I knew they wouldn't grow up thinking their grandfather was someone who could be bought. I closed the door and walked back to my quiet house, where I would spend the rest of my days with enough money to be comfortable and enough peace to sleep at night. It wasn't the ending I had dreamed of, but it was the ending I had chosen. And sometimes, choosing your own ending is the greatest victory of all. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.